So good day, this will be our second lecture for this semester, and this day we will be talking about covenants in the Bible. So the covenant is a practice of a group of people in a particular part of the world during the ancient times. So if this is the world map, and this is where we are, the Philippines, this is Africa, this is Europe, we will be talking about the world of in this part, particularly in this area. So we have here Egypt, we have the Arabian Peninsula, we have here Israel, and zooming in, here we are, it's closer. Egypt, we have Israel here, we have Assyria here, and this is the desert where Moses led the Israelites for 40 years. And this is Europe, this is Greece. Zooming in, here we are. This is what we call the Fertile Crescent because this area is very fertile thanks to the two rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. So this place is called Mesopotamia, the land of two rivers. So we will be talking about the culture and the practices of a group of people in this area, of this particular area. So Israel is somewhere here. In many of the Bible scholarly works, this area is usually called as the Near East. And so we are talking about the ancient Near East. But for us Filipinos, that doesn't make sense because most of these scholarly works have been written by people who live in Europe and in the Americas. And so for them, it's the Near East. This is the East for them. But for us Filipinos who are staying in the Far East, the Near East does not make sense because for us the Near East is the Pacific Ocean, and we will not be meeting the ancient Israelites in the Pacific Ocean, but we will be meeting the people of Moana and her friends. But those are not the types of people we want to talk about today. So for our purpose in this class, we will be calling that place as the ancient Middle East. Okay, the ancient Middle East. Because when we talk about the Middle East, geographically it makes sense because we think of the Arabs, and that's the area that we are going to tackle, the culture of the people in that area during the ancient times. So, as we all know, the Bible is divided into two major parts, and they are the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, a testament, when you talk about testament, you understand the concept of a covenant. The testament is actually the Latin version of the English word covenant. So it's translated from the English to the Latin. So in the Latin Bible, the Vulgate, the New Testament is called as the Novum Testamentum, the New Testament. This is in Greek up here, so it reads Hekaine Diatheke, which is New Testament in Greek. So when we talk about testament, it actually conveys a different meaning from what we want to understand. So here, definition number one is a tangible proof, katunayan, or it's an act by which a person determines the disposition of his property after death. Yung pamana niya, last will and testament. And definition number three, we find what we want, the meaning that we are interested in. Either the two main divisions of the Bible or the archaic. The old definition is the covenant between God and the human race. So now when we talk about testament in modern English, it does not capture the concept of a covenant. Okay, so when we talk about the New Testament, we have to be imagining in our mind, we are talking about the New Covenant. The Old Testament is the Old Covenant. So the Testament, testamentum, was translated from the Greek word diatheke, which means covenant in Greek. And diatheke is a translation from the Hebrew word covenant, beris. Here we have beris. So it's read from right to left. These are the consonants, B, R, T, and these are the vowels. So when I was studying theology, I hated Hebrew because it was really so difficult. I preferred Greek kasi Greek is from left, reading from left to right. Diatheke. So we now see how translation actually changes the meaning. The translation is already an interpretation because the word testamentum does not fully capture the idea of a beris. So now we will try to understand what we mean by beris in the Old Testament. So in the English language, we translate beris as covenant. And so the definition of a covenant today in our modern world, in our modern English, is usually a formal, solemn, and binding agreement. It's an agreement, or again, it's a pledge or a contract. So a covenant, we think of covenant in the modern English language as an agreement, a contract. However, this is a slide I got from the internet. So it defines covenant. This is not mine. This is from the internet. It defines the covenant as a contract or agreement between two or more parties. However, my dear students, we have to understand that a covenant is not just a contract. A covenant has a far richer meaning than just a contract. Because in ancient Hebrew, the word contract, they have a word for contract. It's hose, so it's the exchange of properties or goods or business. But covenant has a different word in ancient Hebrew. They translate it as berith. And so we here see that berith is an exchange of persons creating family bonds or interpersonal relationships. So magkaiba yung kontrata lang at yung covenant. According to Scott Hahn, the difference between a mere contract and a covenant is like the difference between marriage and prostitution, the difference between adoption and slavery. Covenants create marriages, creates adoptions. So in this class, we will try to recapture the original meaning of berith, of the covenant. So why study covenants? Why is it important to have a preliminary on the covenant? Why not just jump right into the Bible? Well, the answer is because the biblical authors, with the covenants, the biblical authors and editors possessed a platform from which they could portray and reconcile nearly every historical, legendary, didactic, folk, and the like accounts in their tradition. If we would delete all references to the covenant, the Bible will be simply an anthology of stories. So without the covenant, the Bible is just a collection of different stories. As it were, the covenant is the structure that houses the plot. In other words, the covenant gives a plot, a continuity in the different stories in the Bible. The covenant is God's saving plan through which the covenant God makes with mankind. So the covenant gives a unitary plot. It weaves the Bible, the many books in the Bible, the many stories in the Bible into a continuous narrative. And of course, because the covenant is everywhere in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. And so if we do not understand the covenant, we will not be able to understand many of the things that are in the Bible. So let's talk about covenants. Sige. So covenants are, first of all, this is a concept that belongs to human relationships, no? Human transactions. So we will try to understand how people in the ancient Middle East made covenants with one another. And then we will now understand how God used this concept of a covenant to express His relationship with Israel. So again, this is something I found in the internet. So it defines the covenant as, the Hebrew word berith, covenant, means a league of confederacy, from the Akkadian root meaning to fetter or to bind. Again, I got this from the internet. A covenant is a bond of blood sovereignly administered. A covenant is that which binds people together. It's always a person, either a God or a man, who makes a covenant. The result of a covenant is commitment, is the establishment of a relationship. A covenant commits people to one another. So according to the biblical scholar Frank Moorcross, we will be referring to the works of Frank Moorcross often. So a berith functioned as a legal means to integrate foreigners of different groups into the familial structure of a particular tribe or society. So a covenant is a process, it is a means by which people who do not belong to our group are welcomed and embraced into our group, so they belong to our society. So belongingness, it's a process of belongingness. So in our world now, we have the concept of the citizenship. So you belong to the citizen, you are a citizen if you belong to the nation. For example, in the Philippines, you are a Filipino citizen. But for the ancient Middle Eastern people, it's actually family that makes that where you. It is actually in the family where you will find your belongingness. So, for many of us Filipino, we know this slogan of the American dream. So we all would like, many of the Filipinos would like to go to the United States and become citizens of the United States, to be an American citizen. That's the American dream, because if you become a citizen of the United States, you gain the privileges, the benefits of an American citizen. And so that's how we understand belongingness. But for the ancient Middle Eastern people, it's actually family where we understand the idea of belongingness. They have no concept of citizenship or society yet, but they have a very strong idea, concept of the family. So a covenant creates belongingness into a particular family. So berith is an elected, it's chosen, as opposed to natural relationship of obligation established under divine sanction. This is according to Hugenberg. So berith, whereas you could not choose your father or mother. It's something that is given, it's natural. But in berith, you get to choose, you get to elect who belongs to my family. So we have to understand that the ancient Middle East people, when they understand the word family, it's not the nuclear family. They have no concept of a nuclear family. By nuclear family, we mean the mother, father, gentleman, ganon, may anak at may nanay at may tatay. But that's not how the ancient Middle Eastern understood family. They have no concept of a nuclear family, because a nuclear family is something very recent. No? When we started to migrate from our probinsya, somebody goes to Manila and they start a family, it becomes a nuclear family. But for the ancient Middle Eastern people, the family it consists in relations of extended family that should be thought of as a clan or tribe. So this is the family. When you talk about family, for the ancient Israelites, ito yung family nila, extended. So we see it's a big family, may lola, may tatay, may nanay. So we see here a picture of Abraham. So we see it's extended. There is a first wife, a second wife, a third wife, and the children of those different wives. So it's extended family. There's no nuclear family in the ancient Middle Eastern people. So if we read from Joshua 7, verse 16 to 18, we will see an example of an extended family. So the family in the ancient world, in the world of biblical faith, the family is the primary unit of meaning, which shapes and defines reality. How do we understand this? So we understand, the ancient Middle Eastern people understand the world in terms of family. For example now, it's what shapes your vision of reality. You understand the world through the lenses of a family. For example, some people today understand the world from the lens of power and success, career. That's how they understand the world. And so they interpret reality based on these categories. Sino ang nasa kapangyarihan? Who is in power? Sino ang nasa posisyon? Sino ang maimpluwensya? These are the significant people at didikit tayo dun, so that they could help further our personal desire for power, our personal desire for career and success. So these are the people who are significant for us, because the glasses we use to interpret reality is through power and career. But people like si Manong Janitor or si Kuya Guard, they do not have power. So for these people who interpret the world in terms of power and career, Manong Guard and Kuya Janitor are insignificant. They are not important. So we do not notice them. We ignore them. So for most of us, we understand the world, we understand other people, not in terms of power and career, but we understand them as human beings, human persons, possible friends, possible kabarkadas. And so if that is your worldview, when you see the world as other people, as possible friends, possible kabarkadas, kapwa, Manong Guard becomes significant as a possible friend. Kuya Janitor becomes significant as a possible barkada. So how we understand the world shapes how we act in the world. And so for the ancient Israelites, the world of biblical faith, in the world of the biblical faith, the family is the primary unit of meaning which shapes and defines their reality. Family, si uncle ko family, yung kapitbahay namin family. And then you see other people who do not belong to your family, they are not family, they are not part of my group. They are different, they are other, they are enemies. So that's how the ancient Middle Easterns understood reality. So kinship relations or family relations define the rights and obligations, the duties, status, and privileges of tribal members, and kinship terminology, family terminology, provided the only language for expressing legal, political, and religious institutions. So family terminologies like father, mother, kuya, ate. That is how the ancient Middle Easterns express even their legal, political, and religious relationships. For us Filipinos, this makes sense because we call people whom we barely actually know as kuya, ate, manong. So automatically we interpret them as part of our family because they belong to our society, they are Filipinos, kapwa natin sila. So we understand them as family, kuya, ate. So that's how the ancient Middle Eastern understood reality. In the ancient Semitic world, whoever was not a relative or friend was considered as an enemy. A non-relative, a non-family, was admitted into family or society circle by means of a pact, and this happens often. And this pact, this process by which you welcome other people into our family is called a covenant. So the covenant making is a process of extending the family. This process of covenant making becomes the central framework for the legal, religious, and political activities of ancient Semitic society, the particular people who live in the ancient Middle East. So if this circle here is the family by blood or by tribe, and the people outside this circle are the foreigners, they are considered as other, as enemies. And we would like to extend our circle of family to include the foreigners. We create a covenant with them. And when we make a covenant with foreigners, with people who are other, we extend our family bond to include them, and we include them into our family, into our clan, into our tribe. So, here we are. Where the fact of blood relationship is indubitable and incontestable, the covenant is already present. In simple terms, where your relationship of blood is already established, kuya mo siya, lolo mo ito, ninang auntie mo ito is already established. There is already a covenant existing. In our families, there is already a covenant existing. On the other hand, where this natural connection is either obscure or completely absent, an analogous legal relationship can be established by means of a covenant. So we create a kind of legal bond wherein they become part of our family. That's according to Quell. So the language of covenant, family-in-law, covenant-making process where people who do not belong to our family become family-in-law, is taken from the language of kinship, family by blood. So in other words, the familiar terms father, mother, son comes first, and this idea of father, mother, son, uncle, grandfather is applied to covenant relationships. Because again, as we discussed, the family is the primary unit of meaning in interpreting the world for these ancient people. Biblical faith is essentially covenantal in its perception of reality. The family is, first of all, a community of covenant making, covenant keeping, and sometimes covenant breaking and covenant renewing. So the family is circled around the covenant. So covenants is the prime principal mark for being a human being. To be human is to be able to make covenants effectively with other people. So that's how the ancient Middle Eastern understood their social reality. So, example of covenant relationships, the most easy to understand for us modern people is marriage. So, marriage in the ancient Middle East was a form of a covenant where two people who are not related at all become one family. They are bound together. There is a binding. Itinatali silang dalawa. Ipinag-iisa silang dalawa. So a marriage happens through a solemn declaration, the I do's. We say, I do take this person. And there's also a oath sign. There's also a ritual element, a bodily expression of this sign through the marital union. That's one example of a covenant. So we can actually look at this article if you want to read more about marriage as covenant in the Old Testament, in the Bible. So you can read this article. The second example of covenant making that will help us understand what is a covenant is adoption. So in other words, when two people are not related by blood, when you adopt a person, he becomes your son. You become related, legally at least. That is why in Exodus, God tells Moses to tell Pharaoh that thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. That is why Israel becomes God's firstborn, because there is a covenant that happens between God and Israel. God adopts Israel to be his firstborn son. So, one is born of a covenant. Everyone is born within a family, a marriage, which is a covenant. Into a covenant family, and wherever one moves in life, one makes a covenant or acts on a basis of an already existing covenant. Thus, the covenant is the presupposition of all life, the creator of rights and duties. Every human relationship is regulated by the types of covenants we create. Sin in the Old Testament is essentially a violation of the covenant, a breach in the family order, a betrayal of the covenant with God. We have to understand that in the Old Testament, their concept of sin is different from the New Testament concept of sin. In the New Testament concept of sin, we think of personal sin. I have sinned against the Lord. But in the Old Testament, there's a very hazy concept of personal sin. For them, sin is communal sin. So when one person sins, he sins as a representative of the community, because the relationship between God and Israel is between God and the community. And so when a person sins, he sins as a member of the community of Israel. So sin in the Old Testament is communal. When we sin against God, we sin against God as a community. That's how they understand the sin in ancient times. So it's a breaking of the covenant between Israel and God. Of course, there are crimes. Crime is something personal. When you kill a person, when you steal, it's a personal crime. But when you sin against God, it's always communal in the Old Testament. That's how they understand sin in the Old Testament. So covenants place you within a community. The covenants you make, you belong to this community, or it casts you out of that community, out of that world. When you break a covenant, you are shunned from the community. Pinapalayas ka from the family, from the community. So of course, we talk about covenant in the familial aspect, but covenant is a multi-dimensional reality. No? There is the cultic and religious element in a covenant. There is a legal element, there's an ethical element, there's a familial element, political and social element. These are the different dimensions of the concept of a covenant. Again, I said a good example or an analogy of a covenant is marriage. No? So marriage, of course, there is something personal that's happening between the man and the woman. There is a relationship that only the two of them could understand. But it goes beyond that. There is a cultic and religious element in marriage. That's why marriages happen in church. That is why we marry before God. And God says, what God has put together, let no man separate. So there's a religious element in marriage. There is also a legal element in marriage, because then you sign a contract, and so it has something to do with properties. There are legal properties, conjugal properties. Ang pagmana sa korte, may relationship, may element din gano'n ng marriage. There is also an ethical element. The husband has a responsibility to his wife and to his children There's also a familial element in marriage because we create a family. There is a political, there is a social element in marriage because, again, when we marry, people treat us differently. The friends of the groom treats the wife differently now because they are now married. Iba na yung pakikitungo. It creates a different kind of bond. So covenants are like that. They are dimensional. There are different aspects of one reality covenant. And so in our class, we will be focusing only on the familial aspect, but without disregarding the different aspects of the covenant. So different biblical scholars would emphasize different aspects of the covenant. Some would emphasize the legalistic aspect, some would emphasize the ethical aspect, some would emphasize the religious aspect. So the covenant is a very rich concept, it's a very rich practice. And so we can now come to a definition of the covenant. Again, this definition will come from Frank Moore Cross. So oath and covenant is, because it refers to the same reality, its oath or covenant refers to the same reality, is a widespread legal means by which the duties and privileges of kinship may be extended to another individual or group, including aliens. So in this definition, we see it is widespread. It is always happening in the ancient Middle East. It is legal. There are laws that define these covenants. And so it involves duties, responsibilities. It also involves privileges. So the family extended to other individuals, to other groups, including aliens. So when we talk about aliens, we don't talk about these types of aliens, but we talk about people who are different from us. People who are other, they are alien. People who are other and they might even be hostile and dangerous to us. But when we make a covenant with them, these people who are otherwise hostile and dangerous become part of our family. They become part of our clan, part of our society. So that is what covenants do. So again, we will be following the definition of Frank Moore Cross as a widespread legal means by which the duties and privileges of kinship or family may be extended to another individual or group, including aliens. So just some characteristics of a covenant. So it's kinship, family-like. So we use the terms of family to understand covenant. There's a close association between oaths, things you swear, and covenant. And it always involves two parties. So it's either between two people or two families, or one person and one family, one kingdom, one nation and another nation. It's always two parties. So that ends part 1 of our lecture for this day.